Hi guys, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to be here tonight to have this discussion about the Bachelor franchise. I know we've had kind of a dry spell here with the franchise having to wait, during lockdown for the Bachelor, having to miss out totally on Bachelor in Paradise. So tonight I want to challenge you though to take a little more critical view at The Bachelor and the role that it plays not only in popular culture, but also how it can really be a valuable site for critical analysis of both social norms and social values. And there'll be time at the end of this for Q&A, so I really look forward to your questions and your input on that. So let's start out with a quick poll. I have 3 short questions for everybody to kind of gauge where you are in terms of your experience with the franchise. So Emily's going to pull up that poll for everybody here. Right, the first question, just simple yes or no, would you consider yourself a fan of the Bachelor franchise? And I guess interpret fan however you like. Okay, cool. So an overwhelming majority as expected. Okay, great. My second question. Okay, so for those of you who said, yeah, I would consider myself a fan. Have you ever said to yourself, I really need to stop watching this show? Have you ever just had that moment where you're like, I can't anymore? And maybe you stopped and maybe you didn't. Because I think there are a lot of us that have said that, but have continued to kind of participate in viewing the show. Okay, so we also have an overwhelming majority, interestingly enough, who are fans, but at the same time that have told themselves at one point they needed to stop watching. Not surprised to hear that. Okay, and then the last question that I have for you, and this is kind of one that might take a little bit more thought. And if you have a quick answer, great. And if not, that's something that we can also kind of dive into a little deeper later. So my third question would be, okay, so then if you answered yes to, I had told myself at one point I need to stop watching the show, was there a specific reason that made you feel this way? Okay, so a little more split here. And I want you to kind of, if there is a specific reason, I'd love to hear about that during our Q&A and discuss that and dive a little bit deeper into that. Because I think there are things that that we're all agreed on as part of Bachelor Nation, that things that just weren't cool, didn't land right. But that's different for everybody, okay? All right, so thank you for participating in that poll. It's a good to get kind of a gauge of where everybody's coming from, at least from whether or not you're identifying as a fan or not. Okay, so let's go over, how do I go to the next slide here? Okay, let's go over quickly the plan for tonight. And I have a ton of content to run through. So I'm gonna try to do that in a fast and efficient way, so then we can also kind of get to questions and answers at the end there. Okay, so the plan for tonight, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about me, a little bit background, just so you kind of know where I'm coming from and my experience as a fan, as part of Bachelor Nation, I guess you could say. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about CMNS 311, Examining Bachelor Nation, which is the special topics class that I taught last fall, which kind of was the vehicle for all of this analysis. And so it provided for me and for my students the space to really do a deep dive into the franchise. So I'll be talking a little bit about that. And then to put this all in context, since essentially we're having a conversation about reality TV, can I talk a little bit about the genre and like the associations that we often bring to the table when we talk about reality TV as a genre. And then I want to really kind of dig into the meat and get to some of the recurring problematic themes that we see represented in the franchise over and over again. So we'll start with some issues with gender dynamics, then talk about race, and then talk about heteronormativity and mononormativity. Certainly the list doesn't end there, and I have a list probably about a dozen things that we could talk about, but those are the three that I'm choosing to talk about tonight, since obviously our time is limited. And then once that is over, we will get into some Q&A. And again, I'm looking forward to your questions and your input on all this stuff. Okay, so a little bit about me. As Emily said, I am a faculty member in the College of Communication. I've taught in the College of Communication for more than 10 years. I'm also alumni, so you know we're all in good company here. I have both a BA and MA from DePaul, so I'm a lifer, right? I am a DePauler for life. I teach courses on communication and technology, intercultural communication, and also relational communication. So probably I use relational communication as the basis for teaching about the Bachelor. And you really can explore this, and I would argue any other popular media text as sort of a site for critical analysis, which I'll talk about in a second. So I'm a communication faculty member and also a conflicted fan. And I think if you are also on here, I don't really need to talk a little bit more about what I mean by that. But I will, and I'll get into what specifically I'm conflicted about. It's this, like, I watch the show. I will admit I enjoy the show, but there's just things that do not sit right with me. And so I've been engaging more and more about like the critical discussions based on what's represented in the show and what's not. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. Just in general, I love shows about relationships, and there are a lot of good, I would say, reality TV shows that really that offer an examination of relationships that I think is super, super interesting. And I like analyzing that from sort of a scholarly communication way, but also enjoying it at the same time. I was just discussing before we started here, I also really love 90 Day Fiancé. And I don't know if there are any other fans out there, but I think it's just a great mix of intercultural communication, relational communication. If you haven't checked it out, and you're into the Bachelor franchise, I would suggest you do yourself a favor and check that out. And then I really believe that popular media text can be super insightful as used in terms of a case study, because they in a lot of ways reflect social norms and values. And I didn't talk about, to back up one step, like what's my history watching The Bachelor? I'm not a day one person. I haven't been watching it for 20 years, but I first dipped my toe into the Bachelor pool, or the Bachelor franchise pool about 10 years ago when I watched maybe an episode of Allie's season. And I watched it because a friend of a friend knew someone who had made like the Final Four or something. They were doing hometown. So I went over to this friend's house and we watched it. And I was like, what? This is 2 hours long. I'm like, who would watch this for 2 hours? Like fast forward, and now I'm like, 2 hours is not enough. I need more of this. But it kind of started then. And I would say I started watching the show fairly religiously by the year 2012. And so like with Emily Maynard's season and Ben Flajnik's season, by then I would say I was kind of hooked, and I would identify as a fan going forward from there. So I would say, kind of before we launch into this a little bit more, kind of as my role as a faculty member at DePaul, I really think that one of my main goals as an educator at a liberal arts institution is to help my students both practice and hone their critical and analytical skills. And I kind of figure, well, why not do this with something that they're already interested and invested in? And not surprisingly, there's a big fan base of people from Bachelor Nation who are undergrads at DePaul. So I said, why not put those two things together? And the results were interesting. We'll put it that way. Okay, so this is the class, CMNS, or Communication Studies 311, and it was a special topics class in relational communication. So what does that mean? It means it's something that isn't like on the books all the time, but it's like a deep dive into one particular topic through the lens of relational communication. So what happened, if we back up a little bit, I was supposed to teach last spring, I was supposed to teach a grad class on intercultural communication, and for whatever reason that didn't pan out. So I go to my program chair and I'm like, can I teach a class on The Bachelor? And the response was yes. So I was very excited about that. And then I started to prep this course that I decided to call Examining Bachelor Nation. This is the flyer that this is all pre-COVID. When I was initially prepping the class. This is the flyer that I put up on campus. Shout out to Allison Nolden, who is my graphic designer on this one. Because you'll note here in the upper right-hand corner, it says Lincoln Park campus. Like the plan was this was going to be a face-to-face class like most of my classes are. I was going to do this. I was super jazzed about being able to have these discussions with everyone. But little did I know that with 2 weeks notice, not only me, but basically everybody else in the world, or at least that teaches had to put their entire class and moved all of their teaching online. So, okay, so this class is still going forward. Now it's in an async online format. Not surprisingly, the class filled up really fast. And kind of going into this, I was truly disappointed that I was not going to be able to teach this class face-to-face. I was really excited about it. I was really excited about having the conversations with my students, and to kind of, have to deal with the fact that I had to do this now all asynchronously was really disappointing. But here's what happened next. Okay, so spring term started. And again, it was billed as an asynchronous class because our college was recommending do things asynchronously. We don't know if Zoom is going to be up for it, if the bandwidth, whatever. So we plan on doing it asynchronously. And so that means that there weren't any required Zoom meetings for my class. It was all going to be online, all kind of asynchronous discussion boards and that kind of stuff. So what happened is, even though there weren't any planned required Zooms, I said, you guys, I'm going to be on Zoom at this time. If you want to join me, please do. You can, see me, I'm a real person, I can answer any questions you have about the class. So I would say, the majority of the students signed on to the Zoom just to say hi, and I kind of gave an overview of the class. And one of my students at this point said, wouldn't it be cool if we could get someone from Bachelor Nation to Zoom with us? And I was like, of course, that would be amazing. And my response to that was kind of knock yourself out. Reach out to everybody you want. I'm happy to contact people or reach out to people that you've already made contact with. That's all great. And I said, we can even say let's do it. Let's try to get as many people as we possibly can to Zoom with us. So saying that, I was like, great idea, but I had very, very low expectations when it came to that. So we had that first Zoom, and I was like, great, well, people are going to start, sending out DMs on Instagram, whoever interested, why not? Why don't we just do it and see what sticks? So to my great, great disbelief, I get an email from a student, probably 24, 48 hours later, that says, Chris Harrison has agreed to Zoom with our class. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. But at the same time, I was really in disbelief. And I was very skeptical that this was going to pan out until I saw Chris Harrison's name pop up in the waiting room in our Zoom. And I was like, this is actually happening. So, as it turned out, so we got Chris Harrison, we talked to Chris Harrison, I'll talk about that a little bit later. As it turned out, this started to become a thing. And honestly, straight up, I have to give all of my credits to my students. My students sending out message after message after message and then the good thing is there are a lot of people in Bachelor Nation to reach out to. So we started with Chris Harrison, Grocery Store Joe joined us second, and I think the next one, through kind of a mutual connection, we got Dustin Kendrick to join us, who just happened to be quarantining with Peter Weber, who popped in on the Zoom, which everyone was like, oh my gosh, he's kind of the most recent Bachelor. That was very exciting for everybody. And as you see here, the Chicago Tribune picked up on the story. It was online. It was also in print, which was really a fun thing and kind of got everybody really excited about the class. So the silver lining for me of being forced online by COVID was that people's schedules were all of a sudden really open. And I think because of that, people were quarantining. It was the stay-at-home order, and I think people were like, why not talk to this class? And we didn't pay anybody anything to do it. I didn't obviously have a budget for this class, but people way more people agreed to this than I would have ever expected. And, you know, I guess kind of the rest was history with that. So these are the screenshots of some of the stars that joined us. And so if you build it, they will come. And they were there, they came, they talked to us, they were open, it was insightful. It was so great, and it took this class to a level that I would have never anticipated. And it was really, really fun. So week after week, and so like Chris Harrison came, okay, grocery store Joe came, and like each time I was still like, these people aren't really gonna show up, are they? But they did, and more people each week from the Bachelor family graciously shared their time and experience with us, and all just simply because my students reached out, DM them, and asked them if they'd be willing to do it. We had 4 Bachelors join us. We had Ben H, and you can see him up in the upper right-hand corner here. He's with his fiance. We had Juan Pablo, which I'm hearing from everybody is one of the biggest accomplishments because he doesn't talk to anybody or doesn't talk to the media. We had Nick Vial, and we had Peter Weber, who of course is the reigning Bachelor. We had 2 Bachelorettes. We had Rachel Lindsay, which for me was the absolute ultimate. I'll talk about a little bit more about that later. We also talked to Tayshia, who rumor has it is replacing Claire as a Bachelorette on this season. So Tayshia, interestingly enough, talked with us for an hour and a half plus. And it was a really like surreal, very cool experience. Like all of these people were very genuine, very down to earth. Everyone was generous with their time. Like Juan Pablo, I could not get off the Zoom. I kept on trying to wrap it up over and over again. It was more than 90 minutes. Same thing with Tayshia. She was more than willing to talk and be open, and it was really, really cool to get to connect with these people kind of on that level. So that was cool. That was fun. You'll see in the lower right-hand corner, you might not recognize that person, but that's Amy Kaufman, and she's the author of the New York Times best-selling book, Bachelor Nation, America's Guilty Pleasure, which we read for the class. So she joined us and added this really interesting dimension in the class that, again, just made it a really extraordinary experience for my students. She's the only one that I take credit for. I reached out to her, but everybody else, 100% of the credit goes to my students. So a really, really cool experience. Okay, so let's briefly talk about, since essentially we're doing kind of an analysis of reality television here, let's really briefly talk about reality TV as a genre and this association with this quote unquote idea of reality, okay? So what is reality TV? Well, depending on who you might ask, maybe it's the best stuff on TV, maybe it's the worst stuff on TV. There are a lot of different takes in there. I personally would argue that reality television is now this cornerstone of the entertainment industry that has proved to be very, very commercially successful, obviously. And I think that it can offer insight into interpersonal relationships, different cultures, and other social systems and structures. And so that's kind of the basis of my class and how I taught my class. Shows that resemble reality TV have been on since the golden age of television. And I think early examples were game shows. Also, candid camera shows were really popular sort of back in the day. But most would argue that the history of modern day reality TV program started in the 1990s. And most point specifically to MTV's Real World, or the first season of that, which aired in 1992. So the format of this was you had a mix of documentary footage as well as interviews, or we often refer to them as confessionals when we're talking about reality TV. So that is what reality TV is. In the very beginning of the modern sort of example of a reality television show, the Real World particularly had this reputation for tackling serious issues that included sex, prejudice, religion, abortion, illness, sexuality, AIDS, illness, death, politics, substance abuse. The Real World, I think, has like a total of 33 seasons at this point, and those more serious issues kind of ended up taking the backseat, and things, later seasons were much more Jersey Shore-esque, if you get that reference. So it kind of went away from that original model that was more quote unquote like documentary feeling. Reality TV really started to, or the programming started to explode in the late 90s, early 2000s, when franchises like Survivor, American Idol, The Bachelor, Big Brother, and all those sorts of things started to take off. So if that's what reality TV is, what is not reality TV? Okay, so documentaries for some reason are not considered reality TV. News shows, news programming, not reality TV. Sports, not in this genre, also talk shows. To me, this is all reality TV. And I think there's a lot in that label, and I think the label itself has these associations that are kind of problematic, and in a lot of ways diminish the value that the reality TV can have. So why does it get such a bad rap? Reality TV is often referred to as trash television. Another common argument is the reality TV is quote unquote fake. Some say that this is a generational thing, and because reality TV is this newer phenomenon, then it appeals to younger audiences, that it doesn't have as much value. I mean, certainly has entertainment value, but cultural value, I think a lot of people argue that, again, it's just trash or it's just fake. So this brings us back to the label associated and the associated expectations when you call something reality television. And there really is today in 2020, there's a humongous range of reality TV program. Certainly some is very scripted. Certainly some is very fakey. But I think then defining reality TV is something that's really tricky. And then therefore this label of reality TV is also tricky. And I don't think that we can say if it's in the genre, it's trash and it doesn't have any value. Because I really think that it does for a lot of different reasons. Like, for instance, what if we called Grey's Anatomy reality TV? And I would say we could, because everything in some sense is a reflection of reality. But I just don't think it's necessarily fair then, this title and the associations that we bring with it. So ultimately, to me, reality TV can be an art form just like anything else, and when done well, can be highly thought-provoking and engaging, and we can learn a lot from it. Okay, why is it so popular? Really briefly, if we talk about communication theory, and kind of one of the things that I used to analyze this show from a more academic perspective is the uses and gratifications theory, which is one of the oldest and most cited sort of mass communication research theories. And it's the idea, and it's very simple, that people use media in different ways to get different things out of it, right? And what cuts across a lot of the gratifications when we talk about reality television is the social aspect of reality television. So watching it with others, or watching it and then talking about it with others. And you see this whole fandom that's exploded with this and other reality television shows. And it's about people connecting and having those conversations about the show. So it's a really, really social thing. And I would say in a lot of ways, this is very similar to televised sports, that it's something that we watch and we talk about other people, we talk to other people about it. It's very much like that water cooler, I guess doesn't exist anymore, but that water cooler conversation that connects us to other people, gives us a point of reference to make social connections to other people. So in that first Zoom with Chris Harrison, which I was amazed that took place, he mentioned that the show being so popular is that, like, it's a cross-generational thing. And he'll say, you know, you'll have sometimes 3 generations of, obviously usually women, watching the show together. And he said, like, this is something that shouldn't be popular anymore, but for some reason it's been on 20 years. And he says that it is this generational thing that kind of connects people to the show that's been ongoing. And from my own personal experience, I used to talk to my 90-year-old grandmother about watching The Bachelor and Bachelorette, and it was a way for us to connect. And so I have that personal experience. And then I also have a student that was in my class examining Bachelor Nation who started watching it, you know, when she was a child with her mother, and had been watching it the whole way through. So it is this thing that cuts across multiple generations. You don't necessarily have a ton of shows that do that. I think that you can see that more often in this reality show context. For me specifically, if I'm doing kind of my own sort of psychoanalysis, self-psychoanalysis here, Why do I watch it, and what's in it for me? In what ways does it gratify me? I think for me, I like the routine of it. I like the ritual of it. And what I really, really think gets me and draws me in and keeps me coming back is that you have this balance or mix of like the predictable, like we know Chris Harrison's going to be there. We know they're going to be at the mansion. Well, things are a little bit different in this upcoming season, but let's talk about everything before that. Chris Harrison's going to be there. They're going to be at the mansion. You're going to have your first night. Then you're going to do your one-on-one dates, your group dates, eventually your hometowns, your fantasy, like the pattern is super predictable. The structure is super predictable, but at the same time, like you don't know what's going to happen at the end. You don't know who they're going to pick. So it's a really good mix of like, certainty and uncertainty. And so for me, the balancing of that particular dialectic is really appealing. And I think for a lot of people, they feel that same way. So yeah, I admit for me that there's this element of like, it's comforting because you know kind of exactly what's going to happen with the trajectory. But at the same time, there's this excitement in watching the show. That being said, with all of that, there are a lot of problematic messages that are packed into the show, okay? So before we kind of dive into those problematic messages, I wanted to share this quote, which is one of the readings that my students did for the class, and this is from a student literary journal and from Denison University, and I think it really is a good starting point to analyze the franchise and some of the messages that it puts out that are problematic. Okay, so we don't want to presume The Bachelor is real, but even the show sends a harmful message. So I'm not making the argument that this is 100% real. I mean, that term I think is problematic for a lot of different ways, but we don't have time to get into that. I'm not going to say like this is real, this is real life, because it's not. But that doesn't mean that the message that it sends doesn't have an impact on who's watching it, and doesn't really reflect some of the more problematic things that are going on in society. All right, so let's then start with that first problematic recurring theme. And I'm just going to get right to it. And the first one is problematic gender dynamics. Okay, so for an example of this, we're just going to go straight to what Bachelor Nation is buzzing about right now, and a really, really unfortunate dark story that's starting to develop. So rewind a little bit, season 23 of The Bachelor, Colton Underwood was chosen as the lead. And so he was dubbed the wholesome American hero. Before this, the Bachelors were kind of maybe more of the quote unquote bad boys. He was kind of this golden boy, okay? He not only is a former NFL player, but he also has this foundation to benefit and create awareness for cystic fibrosis. On top of all that, he's a virgin. So like he's this interesting package that we were given by Bachelor Nation. And certainly they didn't shy away from the virgin plot line that season. So, okay. He ended up, and you see there the cover of People magazine there, he ended up with Cassie, but only after a lot of drama. You know, he was into Cassie. Cassie was like, actually, no, thanks. I don't think this is for me. And he was like, I'm not giving up on you. I'm not giving up on the relationship, and basically tried to quit the show. That's what you see in the lower right-hand corner. He had this moment where they teased ad nauseum of him jumping the fence, and he was like, I've had enough of this. Just want to be with Cassie. Like, she's my soulmate. She's everything to me. And Cassie was like, no thanks. But he was persistent, and that word is chosen very strategically. He was persistent in going after her, and as you can see in this People magazine cover where he's like basically has her in a chokehold, it says, I couldn't let her go. And so the whole thing was, you know, he's making all these grand gestures, like he's giving up all these chances with all these other women. Oh my gosh, like it's so romantic that he's making this grand gesture and doing all of these things that are super extreme. And some people saw it as a grand gesture and interpreted it that way, and fewer people, I think, saw it as red flags. Some of us did. And so a quote from the same two authors that I discussed on the previous slide, like so many depictions of men trying to win over women, his effort to show his love does not involve him acknowledging her own emotions and feelings. So it's kind of like, I don't care if you want to be with me. This is what's meant to be, and we're going to be together, and at all costs, you know, I'm gonna fight for this relationship, and I'm going to make this work. So there was this argument, and like a few people had talked about it when this episode was airing in the end. We're interpreting this extreme behavior as romantic gestures. And he was not acknowledging that she was just like, no thanks, I'm not into it, and like pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed her until finally she was like, okay. So fast forward a couple of years, because this was in 2018 when his season is on. Fast forward a couple of years, the latest news on this couple is they're broken up, and Cassie was granted a restraining order against Colton, and she alleges stalking, that he put a tracker on her car, that he was harassing her via text. The list goes on, and I was watching a video that kind of was going over the court documents, and there's a lot of damning evidence. He hasn't been, convicted of anything, but it got really dark according to the documents that have been filed for this. So certainly no happy ending there for Colton and Cassie. And in terms of problematic gender dynamics, this is not the only example. In Bachelor in Paradise, we have Jordan Kimball, who is kind of a fan favorite, but at the same time with Jenna Cooper, he acted like she was his property, went into a rage when other men tried to court her. Luke P, man, we could spend a whole entire class on Luke P from Hannah B's season, who his whole thing was like, I'm not giving up on this. Even if you tell me to leave, I'm not going to leave. It was kind of this, like, to him, no meant yes, sort of messed up situation. There was that. There are tons of examples. There's maybe a bright spot when during Becca's season of The Bachelorette, her ex-boyfriend returned and was like, I'm going to win her back. This was meant to be, and blah, 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 blah. And this was when she was sort of the end of the process. She was like, no, thanks. Like, not entertaining it at all. But like, whether that's interpreted as like, oh my gosh, it's so romantic, or kind of creepy, we see a lot of the association of these grand gestures that are really extreme behavior and very aggressive as romantic, which is problematic in a lot of different ways. Okay, so let's move on to race, or the under- and misrepresentation of race in the Bachelor franchise. So race really is the elephant in the room in so many ways, or was, when it comes to the franchise. And diversity is on 20 years, right? And there was one lead that was a person of color. Okay. So diversity is a huge problem for the show. Whether or not before they wanted to admit it or not was another thing. It has been addressed. Like, people have been asking them for years, what's the deal here? And we even asked Chris Harrison when we Zoomed with him, what's the deal? But his response, to me, and I don't want to throw Chris Harrison under the bus, he was very gracious to spend his time with us. But in a very unsatisfying way, he told us, it takes a long time for such a big ship to change course, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing. And I think for The Bachelor, if you really get down to it, ultimately for them, it's about ratings, it's about money. And Rachel Lindsay, who is the first Black Bachelorette, first person of color, I'm not necessarily counting Juan Pablo, because that even though he is Latinx, he definitely passes as white. So Rachel's season had one of the lowest overall ratings in the history of the franchise. And so kind of what does that tell you? Okay, so really quick, I'm going to go through this sort of what I have on this slide. There's a podcast called Two Black Girls, One Rose, which is a great podcast that I would recommend anybody check out who's part of Bachelor Nation. And they describe themselves as two black-ass girls invade the whitest show on earth, The Bachelor. And they call out on their podcast a lot of really messed up things on the show that seem to be swept under the rug by production. And so if we move on, if you see in the lower right-hand corner, you see Chris Harrison sitting with Rachel Lindsay. And this was on the Women Tell All for Peter's episode. And so Rachel Lindsay appears, everyone's kind of surprised to hear this, to talk about women of the show being harassed. And everyone's like, what's going on here? And in the podcast, the episode that discusses this event is titled Never Once Said the Word Racism. So even though she came on to talk about harassment, and a lot of that harassment was actually race-based, Rachel Lindsay never once used the word racism. Racism wasn't discussed. Everyone's like, why is Rachel coming on? Why is she doing this? Like, how did they manipulate her into doing this? There was a lot of questions that circulated about that. Like, why does she have to be this mouthpiece for the franchise? Why is she being tokenized? Well, we come to learn, and this is only after we had the opportunity, and we were fortunate enough to talk to Rachel Lindsay, that it was her idea to come on the Women Tell All to talk about harassment. And this was only after talking to Sydney Hightower, who was on Peter's season, who is biracial. And Sydney Hightower, after the show aired, was a victim of a ton of harassment online, having to do and targeting her for her race. So Rachel Lindsay was talking about it. It was kind of triggered by this racist messages that were going online targeting Sydney. So they talked about, but everyone was just kind of like, what's going on here, and why aren't we talking more openly about it? Okay, so obviously then that was in March. In May 2020, we had the murder of George Floyd, which brought the Black Lives Matter movement to the forefront. And this is actually when, it was only days after this when Rachel Lindsay was gracious enough to talk to our class. And again, this was a high point for me. She is super gracious, wonderful. Her being able to talk to her about the franchise really was a super valuable experience for all of us, especially given all that was going on at that particular time. And so we talked to her about a lot of things. Again, I can't emphasize how great I thought that conversation was. But one of the questions that we asked her is, what would you say to those of us who feel guilty for watching the show? And this was, all surrounding the topic of how the show deals with race. And she said, be the change you want to see. And so I think for me and for my students, that was a good, really important moment, that these are not things that should just be swept under the rug. That's really important to have conversations for these, and to, in any way that we can, like, let producers know in production, like, if we're going to watch the show, that these are the changes that we want to see take place. Days later, a week later maybe, out of nowhere, The Bachelor, the franchise, announces that Matt James is going to be the next Bachelor. So the first Black Bachelor, the first, again, if you're counting Juan Pablo as the first person of color, he's the second male person of color lead. And it just kind of seemed like it came out of nowhere. But days before that, a petition circulated. And that's what you see right there, the 40 seasons, 18 years, and one Black lead. It circulated, got millions of signatures. So who knows if that was the impetus, but clearly the producers were picking up on something there. So Matt James was chosen. Rachel, in an interview later, called that a knee-jerk reaction. And just today, I saw an article that was published about an interview with Chris Harrison that said The Bachelor can, quote, do better in terms of diversity on and off camera. So, like, change course on that, and change course pretty quick, interestingly enough. So we'll see if things change. Obviously, Tayshia, the idea now, or the rumor is that Clara leaves abruptly after the first few days of her experience on The Bachelorette, and Tayshia takes over. So I am very much looking forward to watching that. Big fan of Tayshia. So I guess we'll just see what happens with that. So there's been a lot of upheaval, a lot of change. And hopefully that's good change, and hopefully this will lead to more diverse representation, at least in terms of race in the franchise. But that's clearly not the only issue with misrepresentation or underrepresentation. There's also body image. You could talk about anything about religion, sexuality, which brings us to our next slide. Okay, so the last point I want to talk a little bit about and analyze here within the context of the franchise is heteronormativity and mononormativity. So, you know, it's hard to argue differently than, you know, The Bachelor, the franchise or the show in of itself is basically a shrine to heteronormativity. The message it sends is very much that heterosexual is the default, the preferred, and the normal, quote unquote, normal mode of sexual orientation. The show very much enforces this gender binary. And, you know, I would say, like, if there was some sort of competition for the most heteronormative show, I think that The Bachelor, Bachelorette would be a top contender for that. It also enforces, I mean, the list goes on here. It also enforces the patriarchy. I think that they rely heavily on this fairy tale imagery. You have these unrealistic dates. Everything's unrealistic. So talking about reality, a lot of it is, you know, very unrealistic. These proposals, these fantasy suites, et cetera, et cetera. Hannah B's, one of her trailers or promos for The Bachelorette was very much like Cinderella themed, and she had the crown on, but then she kind of took it off. But it wasn't like, screw this. It was just like, oh, the crown. And it looked something like out of a Disney movie. And I think it was intended to subvert that idea of the fairy tale romance, but I don't think that that really landed very much. Okay, so as far as I know, the franchise's first incorporation of a same-sex couple, or kind of even mentioning that part of the world reality was when Jason Tartick, so Jason Tartick, who's now engaged? No, he's now dating Caitlin Barstow, who is on Dancing with the Stars. He was top 4 on Becca's season. So the first time I think the franchise acknowledged even same-sex relationships was when his hometown, when we met his brother and his brother and brother-in-law. So his brother is a same-sex couple. And so I think this was like the first instance of them kind of dealing with that. And, you know, honestly, I felt like that episode, they handled it well. And as we zoomed with Jason, I was like, how do you think they handled me? He said that, yeah, he was just my brother and he was my brother and that was that. So I think, like, okay, fine, that was good. But then fast forward to the last season of Bachelor in Paradise, when we have our first sort of same-sex couple that are contestants, characters, no, whatever, on Bachelor in Paradise. We have Demi and Christian here, who you see a picture of on the right. So Demi and Christian, this was the franchise's first big foray into queer culture with Demi and Christian. So the backstory here, Demi was on somebody's season, totally blanking, whoever probably was before Peter. Okay, so she was on Nick? No, I don't know. I'm sure somebody knows. Demi was like this kind of like spunky, you know, I'm really kind of aggressive, I'm gonna get my way sort of thing, character on The Bachelor. And then she goes on VIP, and then she reveals, like, I'm here and I'm into this process, but I'm really like thinking a lot about this person from home. Turns out this person from home is Christian, who is also a woman. And so even though Christian wasn't part of the franchise, they brought her on to Bachelor in Paradise so they could kind of develop their relationship. And I guess ABC decided that this same-sex couple that you see here, who was white, beautiful, skinny, femme, blonde, was palatable to their viewing audience. So in the article that you see here on the left, written by Hillary Weaver, it's referred to as kind of this sanitization of queerness. So I don't know. I mean, certainly you can be critical of that, but maybe it's a step in the right direction. Maybe not. But I mean, to say that this is representative of queer culture might be sort of pushing that in a lot of different ways. So, and then the last thing that I want to talk about is polyamory and its role in the show versus monogamy and its role in the show. Really, The Bachelor and Bachelorette is a show about polyamory, okay? Love of many, right? You have this one person who is dating I don't know, it starts out with like 25 people, and at the end it's supposed to be whittled down to one person, but we pretend like this is a show about monogamy. 99% of the show is about polyamory and someone being, developing those romantic relationships with multiple people. But again, the ends with this idea of, oh my gosh, monogamy is so wonderful, and that's what we should all be valuing here. Ben Higgins was the first Bachelor to confess, at least on camera, that he was in love with two women at the same time. And, and we can kind of presume that this happens in most situations, even though they might not be straightforward about it on the camera. What happens then is you develop these really strong feelings, and I truly believe that they do have these feelings. I don't think they're quote unquote faking these feelings for the people, the contestants in the show, the leads faking them. But so they develop these really strong feelings with their final however many people, and at the end you're just supposed to, like a switch, shut off those feelings for the people that you have really invested a lot in. I'm sure that they feel like it's a very close, intimate, personal relationship. And you're supposed to shut off those feelings for anybody else, and then the idea is you're going to make this lifetime commitment to just one person. So, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous that it's essentially a show about polyamory, but at the end of the day, it's like, oh, monogamy actually is the best thing, and doing anything else would be weird, taboo, or just not okay. So, I kind of wonder, what if the franchise would lean a little bit more into this idea of polyamory, but I don't suppose that's going to happen anytime soon. So just things to think about. All right, so it is 6:20-ish, and I would love to hear your thoughts, comments. I feel like I confessed a lot here, so if you have any confessions, we're more than happy to listen.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for a really engaging presentation. Like Dr. Stoner said, if anybody has any questions, feel free to submit them through the chat. And yeah, we'll ask away. We haven't gotten any throughout the presentation, so.
Okay.
Okay, we got a couple.
Okay.
One person said, you mentioned 2 Black girls, 1 rose. Oops, sorry. Are there any other Bachelor podcasts that you listen to? If so, which ones? Are there any you suggest avoiding as per the conversation you've discussed tonight?
I'm not personally a podcast person that I'm regularly listening to them. In fact, I don't participate a lot in the fandom. And so I would say participating in the fandom is engaging in any sort of dialogue kind of on other platforms. Certainly have this class and we're having this discussion right now. So I'm not I don't have a hugely intimate knowledge of all the ones that go on, but I have 2 Black girls, 1 rose is good. Rachel, Lindsay, and Becca have a podcast that I've listened to several episodes of, and if Rachel Lindsay is involved, you can count me in. I think that's a really good one. Nick Vial, I guess, has a really popular podcast, and I think Nick is kind of a straight shooter. I don't know. He's a polarizing figure. And I know that Ashley I and Ben Higgins also have a podcast together. Those are the popular ones. But from experience, I mean, I did the most research looking into two Black girls, 1 rose. The other ones maybe I've heard snippets of, but aside from that, I don't necessarily have any specific recommendations. I guess Rachel Lindsay's, which is called, I think, Bachelor Happy Hour, and then 2 Black girls, 1 rose are good.
And someone from the chat also chimed in and said they recommend Game of Roses.
Game of Roses, okay.
I
don't know that one. I mean, maybe I just need to carve out some more time for that, because I love a good podcast. Just doesn't seem to be enough time in the day.
Yeah. Another question we got was, what was the most surprising comment or statement a Bachelor cast member said when they were Zooming with your class?
I think for most people, it was sort of what you would expect, and not in a bad way. But I think a lot of people were very diplomatic in their responses, especially stuff with the franchise and not throwing the franchise under the bus. And even, Nick Vial said kind of very straightforward, like, I don't want to bite the hand that feeds me, kind of thing. And because there was just a news story that came out that he just bought some, LA home for $1.7 million, and that's $1.7 million that he has made off of his Bachelor fame. So I think most people, and another person, like we talked to Mike Johnson, who most people in class thought should have been the next Bachelor instead of Peter Weber. Even he said, like the time wasn't right. And we asked him specific questions about diversity and race, and it was still very diplomatic. Juan Pablo, on the other hand, just like totally trashed most of everything associated with the franchise and really spilled the tea and gave us a lot of dirt on how production was manipulating things and trying to make him say things that he didn't want to say. But I think everybody else's, the idea was like, we talked a lot about the edit that you got as a person on the show. And Juan Pablo was very unhappy with his edit. And I think they just even re-aired Juan Pablo's episode. I could be wrong here. I know that they re-aired it, but I don't think he was willing to come on and talk about it with Chris Harrison. So he was unhappy with his edit and he thought his edit was unfair. But most people were like, I said those things. And certainly it's a show and they're going to edit it and they're going to make a big show out of it. But it is what it is. And that's what I said. Another person who really, I guess, spilled the tea with us is Blake H. I don't remember, from BIP and from Becca's season. And Blake was kind of cast as the villain, and he really kind of opened up to us about his edit and how it was really unfair and how he is experiencing PTSD post-show. So another thing I didn't get a whole lot of time to talk about was like the mental health of the contestants and how that kind of seemed like that was something that was neglected a lot of the time in the past by production. So he's come forward about that, and I think that they're a little bit better now about having psychologists and psychiatrists on set and checking in with people, and people like Sydney Hightower, who had all of those issues. She at least had then some support from psychologists and psychiatrists that were part of the production. So for the most part, people were like, yeah, it was a good experience. I liked it. And there were only a couple people that were like, this was terrible for whatever reason.
Yeah. We actually, on that note, got one question on editing. And the question was, do you feel like there's a way to address the editing on the show? And can you talk about how that also plays into stereotypes?
Yeah, so, and we didn't, I would have loved to talk to our producer. We only talked to contestants, the host, and the author of the book. But we did not talk to a producer, and obviously a producer would have been great to talk to about kind of like the behind the scenes editing and whatnot. But I think that they frame things in a certain way because they have this idea of what their audience wants and what their audience wants to see. And certainly I think that idea is very traditional. I guess traditional is a nice way to say it. But they have these kind of tired, worn out tropes or stereotypes. And I think that they're definitely guilty of feeding those or playing into those. Is it super, super blatantly obvious that they're reinforcing stereotypes? I think in some instances, yeah, we can see that. And I think that they try to be aware of it. And probably if we go back and look over the past 20 years, we'd be like, that was terrible. But I think on some level they try to be conscious of it. But I think it's that sort of, there's more underlying things or underlying bias or the way people are represented or totally left out of representation that's really problematic. So I think it's everywhere. But I think it's also really subtle. And I think a lot of the reason that we can kind of justify watching it too is it really isn't super duper in your face, aside from the simple lack of diversity when it comes to the lead. But I think for a lot of people, it's just subtle enough for people to kind of go along with it.
Great. One other question we have, what kind of conversations did your class have with bachelors and bachelorette participants around their experiences with the fantasy suites and any shaming that kind of came into play there?
So yeah, we had a whole week on sexuality and how that was kind of portrayed. And there was a lot of discussion. I think the tipping point, we usually look to Caitlin's season where she was the first bachelorette to openly admit to having sex. I mean, of course, we assume that this is happening in the fantasy suite, but she openly admitted to having sex with Nick before the fantasy suite, and then she was just slut-shamed on social media. And so they talked about that on the After the Final Rose. So we talked a lot about that, and we talked a lot about sexuality and how there's a double standard there. But I think in a lot of ways that maybe the idea was hopefully we move forward a little bit after Caitlin's season. Unfortunately, Caitlin had to experience that, but then you saw Hannah be more embracing that and talking about sex a lot more in the fantasy suites and dealing with that. But I think they have an interesting representation, of sexuality and the double standard that's different for men and for women that are on the show. But we were interested in talking about that, and that was asked to several of the contestants. No one gave us a whole lot of tea with that, and we didn't get to talk to Caitlin, even though I asked Jason specifically if he would put in a good word for us with Caitlin. But she didn't talk to us, and that's okay. But that was a tough moment, and a tough moment for her to have to experience. I think that maybe the franchise has made some strides since then, but it's obviously still kind of a problematic thing. And then you had the moment with Hannah B and Luke P, and Hannah B talking about having sex with somebody else, and him being like, that's not okay. And that kind of brings also like this conservative religious element to the show, which was another thing that we talked about for an entire week in my class. But yeah, I mean, there's really, really a lot to unpack. So, which just brings me back to my main argument or thesis here, that, there's a ton to analyze here. And we can really kind of hone our critical skills or work on those critical skills. And we can kind of balance the, like, I'm watching this for entertainment, like, and I think that that's great, and I'm entertained by watching it. But we can also have really important conversations that can be spurred from these things. And my whole thing when I started teaching this class, I was like, am I not going to enjoy watching this show anymore? And I guess I don't know the answer to that, because it hasn't been on since I started since I taught the class. But I think that, I also thought my students wouldn't be able to critically engage with something that they associated themselves with so closely. But like, everyone really surprised me in a good way, that they really tore this show apart and brought up really, really amazing points about how all this stuff isn't so great. And one last thing that I want to mention that I didn't get to bring up is, while I'm doing this class, someone reached out to me who's making a documentary film about The Bachelor. And we were talking about it, and we were kind of having this interesting conversation. And what she found is, that most people who watch the show from her research are not people that are just like, oh, it's so great, it's like so wonderful, and I want my life to be exactly like this. People do watch it and they enjoy it, but people are also super harsh. Fans and the fan base are super harsh and super critical of what's going on. So I'm glad to see that some of that has manifested itself in the change up in production that we're seeing right now. So I am cautiously optimistic that the franchise itself is moving in a better direction, but I don't know. I guess we're just going to have to wait and see.
Awesome. We'll ask you one last fun question. Do you have a favorite couple, Bachelor or Bachelorette couple?
I really wanted Jared and Ashley to join us, and they did, and that was cool. I don't even know who else is even together. I guess that they're my favorite. I don't know. I maybe like people more as individuals, but then you're gonna ask me who's my favorite. I don't have. Well, Rachel's my favorite. I think that she is amazing. But her and her fiance, whose name is escaping me right now. Yeah, I guess Jared and Ashley, because they're this really interesting story of like, it didn't work out, and then it did, and now they're married. And if you haven't watched the video of their marriage, watch it, because it's just too much.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for working with us and for leading this webinar, pulling all this together. I know it was awesome and a really fun way to spend a Thursday, and I also definitely learned a lot. So definitely appreciate it. Thank you everyone for joining us again. Hopefully we'll see all of you soon on some upcoming webinars. And of course we have Alumni and Family Weekend next week if you haven't registered already, as well as our virtual fun run starts on Saturday. So we have some other fun stuff coming up here too. So thank you all and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.